The most dangerous man in the city was sitting in the back of an armored car at a red light, until he saw the wife he erased from his life crossing the street, walking calmly beside two children he never believed existed. He didn't know their names. He didn't know their faces. But the moment he saw them, he knew exactly how old they would be. Before the story continues, pause for a moment. Comment below where you're watching from. This story reaches people all over the world. The most dangerous man in the city was sitting in the back of an armored car at a red light until he saw the wife he erased from his life crossing the street, walking calmly beside two children he never believed existed. The sound of the city fell away. The engine idled, rainwater slid down the glass. Somewhere ahead, a horn sounded and then stopped. None of it reached him. Aisha Bennett stepped into the crosswalk without looking up. She moved at a steady pace, one hand guiding a little girl, the other close enough to a boy who stayed slightly ahead of her. She didn't rush. She didn't hesitate. She walked like someone who had learned how to move through risk without announcing fear. Han Di-hyun did the math without meaning to. The children were exactly the age they would be if the night he left had not ended the way he had convinced himself it did. His chest tightened, not with panic, but with certainty. The boy stumbled for half a step. Aisha stopped immediately, bending just enough to steady him, murmuring something soft. The boy straightened. The girl watched the traffic instead of the light. They were careful children. That detail stayed with him. Aisha didn't look toward the car. She didn't scan faces. She didn't search the street for danger. She trusted the moment enough to keep moving. If she had known back then, he realized, then she had chosen silence. The thought settled heavily, deeper than anger ever could. The light was still red. Han didn't move. His hands remained where they were, calm against the leather seat. A man who had ordered violence without blinking found himself unable to give a single command. The crosswalk cleared. Aisha and the children disappeared into the crowd on the other side. The light changed. The car rolled forward. And with it, the life he had buried began to surface, quietly, irrevocably, without asking his permission. The car moved again, but something inside Han stayed behind at the intersection. City lights slid across the window in long, blurred streaks. Reflections cut over his face and vanished. The driver waited for instruction. None came. Han sat upright in the rear seat, back straight, hands resting on his knees. He hadn't shifted since the light changed. Control had always been physical for him, posture, stillness, restraint. Tonight, it felt like containment. He replayed the moment without meaning to. The way Aisha had stopped without panic. The way the boy had corrected himself. The way the girl watched the street instead of the signal. Not fear, awareness. That wasn't luck, that was a life learned carefully. Han's jaw tightened, then eased. The shock was gone now. What remained was heavier. Calculation crept in, not as strategy, but as consequence. She had built something without him. Not fragile, not reckless, functional. The car passed through another light. Green this time, no interruption, no reminder, just movement. Han stared forward, but he wasn't seeing the road. He was seeing time, months compressed into seconds, decisions echoing louder than gunfire ever had. He had told himself leaving was protection, that distance was mercy. But mercy didn't look like this. The silence inside the car grew thick. No phone buzzed. No order left his mouth. The men in front understood better than to ask. For the first time in years, Han didn't feel ahead of events. He felt behind them. And somewhere between one street and the next, a truth began to take shape. Quiet, unwelcome, impossible to ignore. Whatever he had walked away from had not stopped moving. It had learned how to live without him. The house was silent when Han arrived. Not the comfortable kind, the kind built to absorb sound and leave nothing behind, Marble floors, dark wood, glass meant to keep the city out. Every surface reflected control. Han didn't bother turning on most of the lights. He crossed the study, removed his jacket, and draped it over the back of a chair. The motion was automatic, practiced. He rolled his sleeves just enough to feel the edge of his watch against his wrist. Then he stopped. The desk waited for him. A folder lay open where it had been placed earlier. Routine reports, numbers, nothing meant to matter. Han leaned forward, both hands braced against the wood, and scanned the page without focus. His eyes drifted to a photograph clipped inside. Not staged, not polished. A woman crossing a street. Two children close at her sides. Taken from a distance. Han's breath slowed. His jaw tightened once, then released. The room felt smaller, as if the walls had moved in while he wasn't looking. He studied details instead of faces: height, posture, spacing, the way the boy stayed half a step ahead, the way the girl mirrored her mother's pace. It matched too well. Not a coincidence, not imagination. Confirmation settled in, not with force, but with weight. Han straightened and reached for the phone on the desk. The screen lit immediately, missed messages stacked in neat lines. He ignored them. His thumb hovered over a single contact. He didn't press it yet. This wasn't panic. Panic was loud. This was quieter than that. This was a man understanding that a decision made in haste had continued living long after he turned his back. Outside the window, the city moved without him. Traffic flowed. Lights shifted. Somewhere below, ordinary lives carried on. Han stood there, suspended between action and restraint, knowing one thing with clarity he hadn't felt in years. This was no longer about the past. Whatever he did next would shape what remained. Morning came early, whether she was ready or not. Aisha stood at the entrance of the apartment building, keys cold in her hand. The concrete steps beneath her feet were cracked and uneven, worn down by years of people passing through without staying long. A hallway light flickered behind her, casting a tired yellow glow that never quite reached the street. She adjusted the strap of her bag on her shoulder and glanced at the sky, still dark, still cold. Her breath fogged the air when she exhaled. Jun stood slightly ahead of her, eyes already scanning the sidewalk the way she'd taught him without ever meaning to. Nyla leaned closer to Aisha's side, half awake, fingers curled into her sleeve. They were quiet children, not timid, just observant. Aisha liked that. She didn't look up and down the street for help. She didn't expect anything to be waiting for her there. Expectation was a habit she'd learned to break a long time ago. Instead, she reached down and adjusted Nyla's jacket collar, tucking it closer around her neck. The motion was gentle, practiced, a small thing, but necessary. Everything was built out of small, necessary things now. A city bus passed at the end of the block, headlights washing briefly over them before disappearing. Somewhere farther away, a siren wailed and faded. Another day. Aisha checked the time on her phone, slipped it back into her pocket, and took one steady breath. There was work to get to, bills waiting, hours that didn't care how tired she felt. She stepped forward, getting the children with her. The building remained behind them, old, imperfect, temporary. What mattered was ahead. And as she walked, shoulders set and spine straight, Aisha carried the weight the same way she always had. Quietly, without complaint. Ever. By midday, the hospital corridors were loud with movement, but empty of attention. Aisha stood near a notice board, papers folded in her hands. The fluorescent lights flattened everything, stealing warmth from skin and color from walls. People passed her without slowing, shoes squeaking softly against the floor, conversations overlapping and dissolving. She unfolded the paper again. Numbers stared back at her, dates, amounts, a reminder that survival always came with a price. Her face didn't change, but something tightened behind her eyes, not fear, calculation. She thought in hours, not dollars, extra shifts, nights traded for sleep, meals stretched, small decisions multiplied until they shaped entire weeks. Aisha folded the paper carefully, pressing the crease flat with her thumb. She slid it into her bag as if it were fragile, though it wasn't. It was solid, permanent. She leaned back against the wall and closed her eyes for a brief second, long enough to breathe, not long enough to rest. Jun's voice echoed faintly in her memory, asking questions about school. Nyla's hand, warm and trusting, wrapped around her finger that morning. Those details grounded her more than any plan ever could. A clock ticked above the hallway doors. Time moved whether she was ready or not. Aisha straightened, adjusted her bag, and pushed away from the wall. Her shoulders settled into place, familiar with weight. She didn't look for help. She didn't wish for rescue. She stepped forward, back into the noise, carrying the cost with her. Always. The street felt different before she understood why. Aisha walked with steady steps, her bag resting against her hip, the strap firm on her shoulder. Evening light flattened the buildings into dull shapes, and the sky hung low and gray. Cars passed without slowing. Windows reflected her movement and gave nothing back. Jun walked a half step ahead, alert in the way children became when they learned caution early. Nyla stayed close, her fingers brushing Aisha's sleeve with each step. They moved as a unit without discussion. Aisha sensed the shift behind her, not sound, not movement, pressure. She didn't turn around. Turning around gave things shape. Shape invited escalation. She had learned that long before motherhood. Her jaw tightened slightly, her pace did not change. The man stood near a parked car farther down the sidewalk. Ordinary clothes, hands in his pockets. He looked like someone waiting for nothing, someone who blended easily into the street. That was what made him wrong. Aisha adjusted the strap of her bag, a small motion that settled its weight more securely. Her shoulders squared. She kept walking. Jun glanced sideways, reading her posture the way he always did. She didn't nod, didn't warn him. Fear, when shared too early, had a way of growing teeth. The man didn't move. That didn't ease the feeling, it sharpened it. Aisha guided the children past the corner, toward a busier stretch of road where lights spilled from storefronts and people gathered without knowing why. The pressure followed for half a block. Then it faded. She didn't relax, she never did immediately. Some dangers announced themselves. The dangerous ones waited. That night, the street outside Aisha's building felt quieter than usual. Not peaceful, controlled. She noticed it as she slowed her steps, the children close at her sides. Jun's hand slipped into hers without being asked. Nyla stayed tight against her hip, eyes moving, taking in shadows and doorways the way Aisha had taught her without ever naming it as a lesson. The air felt held. Aisha didn't see danger. She felt absent, the kind that came when something had already been removed. Across the street, a dark vehicle sat parked with its lights off, engines silent. It hadn't been there earlier, or maybe it had and she'd missed it. Either way, it didn't belong to the rhythm of the block. She didn't stare. Staring invited attention. Instead, she adjusted her grip on the children and waited for the light to change. Her body angled just slightly toward them, an unconscious barrier she didn't think about anymore. Jun shifted closer. Nyla leaned in, trusting the quiet without understanding it. Aisha felt something else then, not a threat, not safe exactly, pressure without teeth, like a hand hovering near her back without touching. The light changed. She guided the children across. Their footsteps sounded louder than usual against the pavement. Halfway through, she expected the feeling to sharpen. It didn't. The car remained still. Watching, perhaps, or waiting. They reached the other side without incident. Aisha didn't allow relief to show. Relief made people careless. But as they continued toward home, the street behind them stayed empty. Too empty. Aisha didn't know why, but for the first time in a long while, the night didn't press as hard against her spine. Something had shifted. She just didn't know what. The room was lit by a single lamp, its glow contained and deliberate. Han sat at the desk without moving, the file open in front of him. He hadn't turned the page in several minutes. There was no need. What mattered had already surfaced. Dates, addresses, a routine that repeated without deviation. He studied the information the way he once studied maps, quietly, thoroughly, without emotion at first. But this was different. This wasn't territory. This was time. The ages aligned too cleanly to dismiss. Not close, exactly. Han leaned back slightly, the chair barely making a sound. His breath slowed. He had always believed certainty came with clarity. This felt heavier than that. A photograph sat clipped to the corner of the file, grainy, unremarkable, a woman walking with two children, the boy slightly ahead. The girl was close to her side. Careful. Aware. His jaw tightened once. He released it just as quickly. If Aisha had known then, he realized, she had carried it alone by choice or by necessity. Either answer cuts the same. The lamp hummed softly outside the window. The city glowed without pause. Life continues without regard for the weight settling in his chest. Han closed the file with care, aligning the edges precisely. Finality didn't require force. He reached for his phone, then stopped. Some actions are protected, others were exposed. This moment demanded restraint. He set the phone back down and stood, moving toward the window. Below him, traffic flowed. Pedestrians crossed streets without knowing who watched from above. For the first time in years, Han understood something with brutal clarity. Power could erase many things. Time was not one of them. The office on the north side never felt quiet. Even when no one spoke, it hummed with intent. Kang Minyi stood near the window, phone pressed lightly to his ear, listening more than speaking. He liked to hear how people explained themselves when they thought they were in control. A screen on the desk behind him glowed faintly. Surveillance stills paused mid-frame. A woman crossing a street, two children at her sides. The images were grainy, distant, but clear enough. Minyi smiled just slightly. Not because of the woman, not because of the children. Because of who they belonged to. He ended the call and set the phone down with care. Power, when handled gently, tended to last longer. He straightened his cuffs and studied the images again, tilting his head as if appreciating a piece of art. So this was the secret. Han Dihyun had always been careful, borders locked down, chains of command clean, no indulgences, no visible weaknesses. That discipline was what had made him dangerous. Minyi had waited years for this. He leaned back against the desk, arms folding loosely. The children were young, unaware. That was important. Awareness changed how leverage behaved. He didn't rush. Rushing wasted opportunity. Outside, traffic rolled past the building, unaware of what had just shifted. Deals were being made elsewhere. Lives continued without pause. Minyi picked up the phone again, scrolling through contacts until he found the name he wanted. He didn't call yet. Timing mattered more than threat. A secret worked best when it was known by exactly two people. For now, he set the phone down once more, satisfied. Some wars were won before anyone realized they had begun. The car idled at the curb, longer than necessary. Han sat in the back seat, the window lowered just enough to let the night air in. Streetlights spilled across the leather interior, catching the edge of his jaw, the stillness in his posture. He didn't shift, he didn't speak. Across the street, Aisha stood near a small storefront, the children close to her sides. She was adjusting Nyla's jacket, fingers quick and gentle. Jun waited without fidgeting, eyes on the door, already learning patience the hard way. Han watched without leaning forward. Distance mattered. If he stepped out now, the line would vanish. Presence could become ownership. Protection could turn into disruption. He had built his world on knowing which lines never blurred. His hands rested calmly on his knees, not clenched, not trembling, restraint practiced over years held. The driver glanced once in the mirror, then looked away. Aisha finished adjusting the jacket and guided the children inside. The door closed behind them, light spilling briefly onto the sidewalk before vanishing. Han released a slow breath he hadn't noticed holding. The moment passed without acknowledgement, no signal exchanged, no recognition offered. That was the point. The car remained where it was for several seconds longer. Han's phone buzzed once in his pocket. He ignored it. Some protection required absence. Some choices only worked if no one knew they had been made. Finally, he lifted his hand and gave a single, quiet gesture. The car pulled away. Behind him, the street returned to normal, ordinary, unremarkable. Ahead of him, the cost of restraint began to take shape. And Han accepted it without complaint. The call came after midnight. Han was standing in his study, city lights reflecting faintly off the glass behind him, when his phone vibrated once against the desk. No name appeared on the screen. That alone narrowed the possibilities. He answered without greeting. There was no panic on the other end, just a pause, then a voice he trusted to speak only when necessary. "They're closer than expected." Han closed his eyes briefly, not in frustration, but alignment. The pieces slid together with unwelcome precision. He had felt the pressure building before the words arrived. "Where?" he asked. An address followed, familiar, too familiar. Han ended the call and set the phone down carefully. The room felt tighter now, as if the walls had leaned in to listen. On the desk, a tablet glowed with a paused image, grainy, distant, but unmistakable. A street corner, a parked car, time-stamped late evening. He studied it without expression. This wasn't a discovery. This was confirmation that restraint had limits. Han straightened, jacket already back in place. His movements were unhurried, deliberate. Panic wasted energy, precision preserved it. He didn't reach for weapons, didn't issue threats. Instead, he opened another secure line and sent a short message. No explanations, no emotion. Just instructions. Outside, the city continued its rhythm, unaware that something had shifted beneath it. Traffic lights changed, doors opened and closed. Ordinary lives remained ordinary. Han stood still for a moment longer, absorbing the weight of what was now inevitable. Protection could no longer be invisible. It would need to be precise. And it would need to be silent. Because once a warning was heard, it could never be unheard. Kang Minyi enjoyed rooms where people hesitated to speak. This one suited him. He stood near the desk, phone resting in his hand, listening to the silence after the call ended. The information had traveled quickly once it left his control. That was the nature of secrets. They either rotted in darkness or spread. On the desk, images lay scattered without order. A woman crossing a street, two children walking close, the same scene from different angles, different nights, enough to form a pattern, enough to matter. Minyi studied them without attachment. He wasn't interested in the woman herself, or the children. What interested him was the shift in balance. Han Dihyun had built his reputation on isolation, no visible ties, no leverage. That illusion is gone now. Minyi smiled faintly. Not because of victory, because of timing. He turned his phone face down and leaned against the desk, arms crossing loosely. This was not the moment to act. Acting too soon burned options. Power worked best when it waited. Outside the window, the city glowed under artificial light. Cars moved. People laughed somewhere far below. None of them felt the pressure tightening around a man who believed he had erased his past. Minyi knew better. Some things couldn't be erased. They only changed form. He gathered the photographs into a neat stack and slid them into a drawer. Not hidden, reserved. There would be a call soon, from Han, from someone close to him. It didn't matter which. The message would reach him eventually. When it did, Minyi would already be ready. Because the most effective threat was never spoken aloud. It was simply understood. The night felt different the moment Aisha stepped outside. Not quieter, not louder, altered. Streetlights cast steady pools of light along the sidewalk, and the air carried the damp smell of concrete after rain. Jun walked close to her side, shoulders squared, eyes scanning ahead the way he had learned to do without instruction. Nyla stayed tucked in, fingers curled into Aisha's coat. Aisha adjusted her grip on them without thinking, her body angled slightly inward, forming a barrier she didn't consciously acknowledge. Across the street, a dark vehicle sat parked where none usually did. Engine off, lights dead. It blended too well with the block to be accidental. Aisha didn't stop, she didn't stare. She felt the pressure instead, the sense that the street had narrowed, that movement had been guided rather than chosen. Jun glanced up at her. She met his eyes briefly and gave a small shake of her head. Not dangerous, not yet. They continued walking. Another vehicle appeared farther down the block, just visible between parked cars. Then another, positioned at the corner. None of them moved, none announced themselves. The realization settled slowly, like a hand placed between her shoulders. Someone was watching. Not hunting. Guarding. The difference mattered. Aisha's shoulders loosened a fraction, not relief, instinct responding to something unfamiliar but steady. She didn't question it. Questioning wasted time. They reached the building entrance without interruption. The door opened. Light spilled out, then disappeared as it closed behind them. Outside, the vehicles remained. Silent, still. Protection, she understood, didn't always ask permission. Sometimes it simply arrived. And sometimes, the most dangerous thing was not knowing who had sent it. Rain traced thin lines down the glass as Han stood by the window of his office. The city spread beneath him in fragments of light. From this height, everything looked manageable, distant. He knew better. Behind him, the desk waited. Two phones lay side by side. One vibrated softly, screen lighting up with a name he hadn't seen in years. The other remained dark, silent, patient. Han didn't reach for either. He rested one hand against the glass instead, feeling the cold through his palm. Power had always given him speed, decisions made quickly, enforced without hesitation. Tonight demanded something slower. He thought of the children's spacing in the crosswalk, the way Aisha had moved without fear, the quiet competence of a life built without him. If he stepped forward now, he would change everything, not just for himself, for them. That knowledge settled like weight, not doubt. The phone stopped vibrating. The room grew still again. Han exhaled slowly and straightened his jacket, restoring the shape the world expected from him. Public armor, private consequence. He turned away from the desk and walked past it without looking down. Some choices protected people by refusing to touch them. Outside, traffic continued its endless flow. Somewhere below, families moved through ordinary nights without knowing how close danger had come or how carefully it had been redirected. Han paused at the doorway, one last look at the city behind him. This decision would not bring relief. It would not erase the past, but it would keep the future intact. And that, he understood now, was the only power that mattered. The house was too quiet for someone who owned it. Han sat on the edge of the bed in the master suite, suit jacket folded neatly beside him, tie loosened but not removed. The lights were low, casting long shadows across furniture chosen for presence, not comfort. Everything in the room obeyed him. None of it reached him. He leaned forward, elbows resting on his knees, hands loosely clasped. For the first time that night, he allowed himself to stay still without planning the next move. Power had always answered his questions before. Money, fear, loyalty, one of them usually did. Tonight, none of them offered anything useful. He pictured the boy's instinctive alertness, the girl's quiet attention. the way Aisha's body had moved around them like a shield formed without thought. Those things had grown without him. That was the part he could not correct. Han closed his eyes briefly, not in regret that demanded punishment, but in recognition. Some absences became permanent the moment they were chosen. A glass of water sat untouched on the nightstand. He reached for it, then stopped. Even thirst felt unnecessary. Everything essential had already been decided. The city outside glowed softly through the curtains. Somewhere, people slept without knowing how narrowly their lives intersected with danger. Somewhere else, a woman locked her door and trusted the night to hold. Han straightened slowly and stood. He would continue to protect what he could not claim. He would remain where he belonged, outside the life he had left behind. This was the cost no negotiation could reduce. And for the first time, he accepted it without resistance. The evening settled gently over the neighborhood. Aisha walked at an unhurried pace, the children's voices weaving in and out of her steps. Jun talked about something small and important to him, school, a question he hadn't finished thinking through. Nyla laughed softly, the sound light enough to surprise her. Aisha listened, truly listened. Her shoulders felt lighter than they had in weeks, though she couldn't have said why. Nothing had changed on paper. The bills were still there, the hours are still long, but the air around her no longer pressed so hard. They stopped at the corner while the light changed. Jun rocked back on his heels. Nyla traced a pattern on the sidewalk with her shoe. Ordinary gestures, ordinary time. Aisha watched the street without scanning it. That, more than anything, told her something had shifted. They crossed together, steps in rhythm. No one hurried them, no one followed. The night held its distance. Far down the block, a dark car sat parked where it blended easily with the rest. Engine off, lights dead. It might have belonged to anyone, or no one at all. Aisha didn't notice it. She guided the children home, unlocked the door, and stepped inside. Warm light spilled out briefly, then vanished as the door closed behind them. Outside, the street returned to itself, unremarkable, quiet. From a distance, protection remained where it was meant to be, unseen, unclaimed. Inside, Aisha set her bag down and smiled as Nyla tugged her hand, asking for something small and immediate. Life continued. Not dramatically, not triumphantly, just safely. And that was enough. Han stood at the balcony railing as the city moved below him, ordinary and unaware. From this height, lives intersected without noticing one another, crosswalks, red lights, small decisions that quietly reshaped futures. Somewhere among them, Aisha walked her children home, safe, unclaimed, untouched by the world he ruled. He did not reach for his phone. There were no orders left to give. Protection would continue without presence, without ownership. Han turned away from the view and stepped inside, understanding at last that redemption was not something he could take or be granted. It was something he chose every day by staying away. Would you have made the same choice? To protect from a distance, even if it meant never being known? Share your thoughts in the comments. If this story moved you, share it with someone who believes redemption should be earned. And subscribe for more stories where power meets consequence.